Welcome in, everyone, to a special live edition of the It's Official podcast, created by Jeff Siegel, proudly hosted by Jeremy Plonk. First Bet and Express Bet, folks, checking things out in the first Breeders' Cup Wager Guide. Welcome in as we get set to look at 14 championship races throughout the course of the Wager Guide. But here on this specific podcast, we take on 5 hot topics each and every week in racing, and it's all about the World Championships coming up Friday and Saturday at Del Mar. Can't wait to finish all my handicapping. We're knee-deep in it right now, and as we get this early week each Tuesday preview as we have here on the It's Official podcast for you, we will follow up with final handicapping analysis on Thursday on the First Call podcast when I'm joined by First Bet handicapper Scott Shapiro. So plenty more handicapping to come out this week, but we've got things in some divisional categories, if you will, over the course of the next half hour or so to talk about with this year's Breeders' Cup. But those things all changed. Headlines in racing, headlines as a sports writer and a turf writer for more than 30 years will tell you that. If you wait around long enough, the news will change. Typically, this podcast comes out late morning on a Tuesday. This morning was very busy. Sovereignty, the favorite for the Breeders' Cup Classic, came down with a fever overnight. Trainer Bill Mott and the connections of this Godolphin color bearer have to make some decisions. Mother Nature's going to have her hand in it as well. And we will see if Sovereignty, the winner of the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont, also the Travers, if he's going to make the field for the Breeders' Cup Classic. The next 24 hours really touch and go. The fever was treated today, so those things will have to clear the system, and we'll have to see what happens when the horse isn't on medication in terms of keeping the fever down. So here from FanDuel TV and Breeders' Cup on X today, here was the reaction from trainer Bill Mott at Del Mar. We'll play that for you, and we'll talk more about the implications of Sovereignty's big temperature issue.
He had a slightly elevated temperature, and that remained through the night. This morning at 5 o'clock, and when we got here, 5:30, he still had a slight fever. He had had no medication at all. So we've drawn blood, and so we've taken, blood samples, and we'll have the results. Part of the blood samples have come back, and part of the blood samples are pending. Since then, since 6 o'clock this morning, we gave him some medication to help with the fever, to help alleviate the fever, which his temperature is down to normal right now. He's eating everything. He looks fine. You saw him with his head out. He's eaten all his grain. He's not missed a note. He has not missed any feed all year long. I can say that. And last night and this morning was no exception. He seems to be sharp. You saw him looking out over the webbing. He looks fine. But right now, as of right now, there's a possibility that he won't make the race on Saturday. If we don't feel like he's 100%, he's not going to run. I'd like to give myself 10% wiggle room to monitor him for obviously the next 4 or 5 days. But until tomorrow, I think it's very important what happens throughout the day and over the night. And if his temperature remains normal, which it is right now, if it remains normal throughout the day and the night, and we look at him tomorrow and he's still eating and he looks good, and the blood work comes back with a positive look to it, we're going to reevaluate. We're going to reevaluate every day, and probably several times every day. But right now, I just want everybody to know.
Bill Mott with those words. We talked about being a big temperature issue, and the first word out of the interview was it was a mild temperature. Mild in the elevation, big in the problem, though, is timing right now because Breeders' Cup just 5 days away for Sovereignty on Saturday. And look, today was supposed to be a walk day for him. He worked yesterday. So typically, after a horse has their major workout, the next day they'll just walk the shed row and not come out to the racetrack. Then the second day after the work, they'll come back to the racetrack and resume jogging and up to a gallop up to the rest of the race, to the race week. So for Bill Mott to come out today on a day when the horse was walking the shed row anyway and going public with the temperature story, kind of interesting because a lot of times you'll see something like that wouldn't get out. The horse wasn't supposed to leave the barn anyway for the day. So that would be kept under hat a lot of times. So the fact that it's out now and it's in the public really makes you feel like this is a long shot that Sovereignty is going to make the Breeders' Cup Classic. Not only are we talking about treating the temperature, but that's just treating the symptom with the medication. The source of the temperature, something viral, some infection, that sort of thing like that, which causes the elevated temperature is really what they need to get their hands on. And that's why they draw the blood work and they're trying to find out things like white cell blood counts, things like that. For Sovereignty, he's not missed any time at all in terms of his training because of this, because it was, again, on a normal walk day. He wouldn't have left the shed row today, typically on the day after a walk. He would not have gone to the racetrack unless he was just kicking the barn down, but that just wouldn't have been part of the routine most likely. So he didn't miss anything in terms of the fitness and the training by missing today, but there's just no margin for error whatsoever now for the rest of the week. And again, if they don't find the underlying problem and they don't treat the underlying problem, then treating the symptoms not going to do him any good either. So this does not look good for Sovereignty, the 6-5 morning line favorite on David Aragona's morning line for this year's Breeders' Cup. We talk about this classic field of 2025 being one of the greatest ever in Breeders' Cup history. Of course, the Breeders' Cup in its 42nd year, dating back to 1984. The only field I can say with any certainty is on this level, if not a length or two in front, would be the 1998 Classic. But with what these 3-year-olds potentially could do down the line, the Baez says, I don't think we're going to see Journalism and Sovereignty run much past this Breeders' Cup. But what the potential of the 3-year-olds in this crop could do compared to what we had in 1998, whereas obviously a more veteran group with the 6-year-olds like Skip Away. I think Silver Charm was 5 by that time. This crop in this year's particular Breeders' Cup Classic could have been the greatest ever. Without Sovereignty, we're probably not having that conversation. It's a very good classic with or without him. Let's take a look at the field for the Breeders' Cup Classic, and we'll talk a little bit about what things might shake out here and how everything really changes if Sovereignty's out of the lineup. Field of 10 has entered in here. Sovereignty wouldn't have been part of the early pace, so his defection really isn't going to affect how the race is run or how the race is won per se. Certainly could impact who wins the race, as Sovereignty was a very strong favorite at almost 45% chance if you look at the parimutuel odds in there. You take Sovereignty out of there at 6-5, and that's 45 points in a morning line that would get redistributed in other places. I know it's way too early to already be writing him off like he's not going to make the race, but folks, I got to say, that's the way I'm handicapping it. And as a handicapper, you've got to prepare for all your different scenarios in here. The most likely scenario to me at this point, being around the game, being on notes teams for 30 years, this to me feels like a horse who is not running coming this Saturday. So if Sovereignty comes out, then Fierceness, who drew the rail, they didn't want anything to do with the rail. But interesting here because with 1.25 miles and just a field of 9, they could even leave an inside stall open. And the problem with Fierceness in his last race at Del Mar was he ducked in at the start of the Pacific Classic, and there's a temporary rail there, and the temporary rail didn't go all the way back to the starting gate, so there's some space there. And a lot of times when a horse leaves the starting gate, they'll want to duck into space a lot of times, inside or outside, if you watch the head-on of most races. So they're going to move a temporary rail. Joaquin Jaime reported this yesterday on the Breeders' Cup work show that they're going to make the temporary rail go farther back towards the starting gate so that there isn't that big gap. And again, with another scratch or so, we're down to 9 in here. They could move the gate a little bit. They could not use the first stall and leave the first stall empty. It could get more comfortable down there for Fierceness than what he had in the Pacific Classic. So I know Todd Pletcher was, he looked like somebody stole his puppy and after drawing the rail, anything but the one. Certainly disappointment for the Fierceness camp to get that one hole. But I'm not so sure. Again, like if there's another defection or two, like the amount of horses on the track and the congestion is a big problem with the rail in a lot of cases. The smaller the field size get and the fewer horses that are trying to all come down on the rail and that sort of thing like that and all get that magnet moving towards the wire the first time, it's going to make the trip a little bit easier. So for Fierceness, any defections in this race are a positive, but certainly the defection of the favorite when you're the second choice is one of the best positives you can have. If you're a fan of Fierceness, this is a situation that obviously increases your chances of taking home the Breeders' Cup Classic. As in terms of the odds, I mean, if you take Sovereignty out of this, then you're looking at Fierceness as a favorite if David shifts everything down accordingly to the way he's got it lined now, and I assume he probably would. Forever Young drops, Sierra Leone, and you take a look at those horses from last year when we ran in the Breeders' Cup. Those are the top 3 finishers from last year's Breeders' Cup Classic. They come back now as the 3 favorites. And if you look at the way they were bet last year in the Breeders' Cup Classic, Fierceness was the favorite in that race at 5-2. So he was 5-2 in that particular spot. Forever Young was at 4-1. And then Sierra Leone, I believe, was the longer of those 3 at 6-1, almost 7-1. So don't be surprised. Forever Young ends up second choice. That's the order that they were bet last year. Now, I know Sierra Leone's had a decent year this year. Forever Young's had a decent year, but neither one has like run the table. They've had their missteps, and Forever Young may not be quite as good as he was coming into the race last year. That race in Saudi Arabia earlier this year against Romantic Warrior, the great horse from Hong Kong, really seemed to knock him out in the Dubai World Cup. I thought his comeback race, Forever Young, was pretty good last time, but I'm a big fan of this horse. I've loved him. I liked him last year. I stupidly picked Next to win last year, the marathoner, who I think is still out there on the track collecting dirt. But Forever Young was all in my plays last year as well. And I really thought he was the horse to beat in that race. I thought we'd get some value in another place. But I think Forever Young this year might be a step off of what he was last year, even though you're saying a 4-year-old should be much better than 3. If this was back in the spring and when he ran that race in Saudi Arabia, late February, so late winter, early spring, Forever Young, I think, would be the horse to beat in this race. I just don't know where he's at in terms of where he was earlier this year. Sierra Leone, again, 8-1. You're looking at these prices now. You're looking at Fierceness, I believe, somewhere around 9-5, honestly. If Sovereignty comes out of the race, I think Fierceness is probably about a 9-5 favorite. Forever Young, second choice at 7-2-ish. Sierra Leone's down around 5. I think you could get a lot more action on Mind Frame in this case. And another horse who's probably going to take money, and it's kind of indirectly, but journalism is going to get bet harder because there's people who have a lot of respect for this 3-year-old crop. And if Sovereignty's not here, who takes that money then? Does it go to the older horses? If you really like the 3-year-old crop, journalism's a very popular horse. Let us not forget, even after Sovereignty beat him on the square in the Kentucky Derby, the favorite for the Belmont Stakes, not the morning line favorite, the post-time favorite of the Belmont Stakes was journalism. So he's going to get some play in here. If Sovereignty's out, journalism gets more play probably, and he might be the biggest dropper from 10-1 in the morning line. He might be a horse who's going to vie for third choice in there and be something very close to what we see for Sierra Leone. I think Forever Young probably goes off second choice, but I could see Sierra Leone and journalism similarly betting here. Mind Frame's going to come down in price too. And Baeza, who we're going to talk about in a little bit in another segment, could get some of that action as well. But a lot to worry about when you talk about handicapping the Breeders' Cup Classic right now because of Sovereignty's uncertainty. I think Bill Mott said, I'd like to leave a 10% chance for a little wiggle room. That's not a lot of optimism there. And again, the fact that they were talking about this today on a day when he was really just walking the shed row more or less probably on the plan after working yesterday, to me, it's out there, which means it's there. And they're not going to take any chances with this horse. We know how he was handled around the Preakness Stakes and not running in all 3 legs of the Triple Crown. Hopefully we get to see Sovereignty healthy and we get to see him run on Saturday. But right now, as the top headline in the Breeders' Cup, not just this podcast, that is all the talk. We will see the temperature of Sovereignty be the big story here over the next couple of days. Let's go to our second topic this week on the It's Official podcast. Hot or not paces of the Breeders' Cup, because when it comes to handicapping, I don't care if it's the Breeders' Cup or something tomorrow at Gulfstream Park or a weekend race in Ohio. Pace makes the race in a lot of racing, especially here in the United States. How hot they go early affects the race. How slow they go early affects who can close and try to pass those horses who had an easy go on the front end. I went through the 14 races, and the first thing I did in my handicapping, this began back when the past performances came out for the pre-entries, was start to go and try to get a pace profile of each horse. Where do they prefer to run in the race? Set all those horses up with the way I like to do it, speed, press, middle, closer, and put horses in 4 different divisions. Speed horses go to the front. Pressers like to sit in that second, third, fourth area. Middle pack horses in the middle, obviously. And the closers, your deep sustained, come from behind horses. So I break them all down in those kind of categories and set it up, and then wait for the post position draw, because an inside or outside draw, drawing next to another horse who has a similar style, can sometimes affect where a horse might end up in a race. So now that all the races are entered, we know who are in the starting gates as far as the entries go. We can kind of apply some of that early work that was going on. And here's the way I look at the paces for this year's Breeders' Cup races: hot or cold, all the way through the Breeders' Cup. We'll start on Friday, where the Juvenile Turf Sprint is a race where I think we've got a fair pace, which means this race should run about what you would expect. It's not going to be overly hot. It's not going to be overly slow early. There's the right number of front runners, the right quality of front runners in a race for what we are looking for. For a 5 furlong, 2-year-old turf sprint, the Juvenile Turf Sprint looks like a fair pace. What does that mean from a handicapper? If you like a horse who goes to the front, they could win the race. It shouldn't overheat. If you like a horse who comes from behind, they should have their chance. The best horse, when you get a fair pace scenario, the best horse with the best circumstances and trip should get the victory. I've got a warm pace set up in the Juvenile Fillies. I think that they're going to go slightly faster than expected in the Juvenile Fillies. Part of that reason, you got Bottle of Rouge down in the 2. You've got Explora, who's got pace. Now, I know those are 2 Baffords, but you've got some other speed in the Juvenile Fillies that I think can turn up the heat in here a little bit. When you get 2 from the same barn that might be part of the pace scenario, you don't expect the 2 Baffords to create that speed. But Iron Orchard drawing the rail, I think, is a horse in the Juvenile Fillies that makes that race a race that you want to consider in terms of the pace. Iron Orchard down on the rail is a horse who has sprinted to victory twice, went in the Frazette around 1 turn and rallied a bit in that race after not getting out of the gate. But this horse was out of the gate going 6 at Saratoga and now drawing the rail. I would expect Iron Orchard to be part of the early pace. Meaning is a horse who's got some speed coming out of a sprint race at Los Alamitos and again drawing towards the inside. With the 1 and the 2 both having pace, I would expect Meaning to get out of there. Percy's Bar led all the way in the Alcibiades before being disqualified in that particular race. Also has some pace about it. So I think this is a race that's got some speed. If you can find a horse who's the better finisher in the Juvenile Fillies, I think that's a race, as we talk about these different pace scenarios, that you might want to find a horse who can finish. That doesn't necessarily mean a deep closer, but certainly a horse with a closing running style might be advantaged in a race like the Juvenile Fillies. But I like things like the brisk late pace figures from a handicapping standpoint. When I see a race that looks like it could be above average or even hot in terms of pace, I think that's when you kind of look at things like how fast are horses finishing. Even if they're horses that are up towards the front of the pack, how strong are they at the end of their races? And sometimes you can get that through a pace figure. So those are the kind of tools that you might be looking at for some of these races that are going to heat up a little bit more. We'll go through all these, not in tremendous detail, but Juvenile Fillies Turf, I do not think there is any speed really to like hang your hat on the Juvenile Fillies Turf as terms of a really fast pace. The Brave Deb, Celebrity Warrior, 2 that might be up towards the front in there, ground support, but I do not think they're going to go very fast in the Juvenile Fillies Turf. If you have one near the front of the pack that you think has a shot, move him up, I think, in a race where it is a cold pace projection. Warm pace in the juvenile for sure. When you've got Brandt in there with his speed, Blackout Time and Ted Nafi were both pretty forward at Keeneland last time. You've got some other space in there. Litmus Test, I don't think is going to go out there banging heads with Brandt, but I've got this race as a pretty good pace. I think they're going to go a little above average here in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And again, Brandt has never been around 2 turns before, so you get that sprint speed for him stretching out. Again, cold pace in the juvenile turf then to wrap up the Friday card. Could be a situation where, hey, Nene, an outfielder, or up there North Coast, but I do not think it's a very fast pace at all. Those horses might be able to extend. You might get a horse who can stretch out in distance and win a race where the pace isn't that strong up front. That could be the situation as you handicap your juvenile turf. Now let's go to the Saturday cards. The Filly and Mare Sprint and the Sprint both get the hot designation. I think they're going to cook in those races. Problem is finding real quality closers in those spots. Don't just jump off the page. In terms of the Filly and Mare Sprint, that field is a race that's been intriguing me a lot more as I get closer to race time. Some of these horses that we'll talk about in just a bit are training exceptionally well in here. But in terms of the pace in this race, Sweet Azteca, we know she can cook. Hull and Ice never backs off from an early pace duel. Hope Road and Ricci, 2 Bafferts in there. Baffert's going to have part of the pace in here as he's got 3 of the entrants in the race. Tamara's got some early speed about her. I think this race goes fast. Which horses from the closing and off the pace? Zeitlos obviously is a horse who has a rallying running style. Vava maybe from off the pace, a mid-packer in here. And I think Splendora is a horse who went a little bit longer last time, and the cutback and trip could be very beneficial. So Splendora one to certainly consider in here. I don't think she comes from the clouds, but I don't think she's right up a ding-dong and on the lead. Among the Bafferts in here with Ricci and Hope Road, Splendora might be one who can sit just a tiny bit. But all 3 of the Bafferts have had some experience around 2 turns as well. But this race, I think, has a very fast pace. If you win it up front, you will have earned it. But Sweet Azteca, she's going to be out there cooking 6 furlong speed going 7/8 of a mile. Let's take a look at some of the other pace scenarios as we're with you live on a Tuesday night. Hope you're enjoying the podcast. Be sure to check us out each week on the It's Official podcast. And again, Scott Shapiro and I will be handicapping all the Breeders' Cup races in some detail, not all of the races, but some detail in our handicapping and our top plays and long shots to look for coming up on Friday. Some other hot paces or worn paces to look at. The distaff, I think, goes pretty fast. Breeders' Cup distaff amongst the runners in there. Nitrogen with the rail probably has to use a little. Scylla's got sprint speed. Scottish Lassie can go to the front. Seismic Beauty, the favorite's definitely a front runner. But the one thing that cooks the pace up a little bit warm in the distaff to me is all the fillies who want to press the pace and sit fairly close. I've got that press category on no fewer than 6 of the 13 entered in there. If you can find a closer at a price, and we'll mention one here in a little bit as we get to a long shot segment, you might consider in the distaff. This is a race that either goes to the obvious or something completely off the wall. Seems like a distaff winner is either $5 or $50. Could be that case this year if it's not Seismic Beauty. Breeders' Cup Turf seems to have a fair pace in there. Some of the major players like Mini Hawk won't be too far off of it. I don't think they're going to go fast in there. Salawi is a horse who's got some speed coming from overseas. Goliath doesn't want to be too far out of it. Rebels Romance, we've seen that one press the pace or drop back. Pretty versatile. I think it's a fair pace in the turf. I don't think any style is advantaged in there. I think the quality horses will get their run of the race. The one race in the mile is a race that really doesn't have any speed. When you talk about the cold paces of the day, who's going to the front in the Breeders' Cup mile? There is no guaranteed front runner in there. It could be the horse on the outside, Karat, coming from Europe. And we don't think of the Europeans as horses having tremendous speed, but this horse has some sprint speed. And from the outside, Rossa Ryan's going to have to show a little bit of pace in here and get up and go, but we don't know if this horse will get out of the starting gate effectively in U.S. racing. Certainly, we don't see the British horses jump at the start too well here in the Breeders' Cup historically, but Karat was a Grade 1 winner as a rabbit, a horse who was in a race for a much more ballyhooed runner and one at the grade 1 level and likes going around turns. Now, whether or not that's because he's a horse for course at Goodwood, but we know about Karat can make some turns, not running on the straight in the miles in Europe, does the best running on the turns. And again, grade 1 quality when they let him loose as a rabbit earlier this year. So Karat could be an interesting horse in there. 20-1 in the morning line. And again, that name's going to come back up in our long shot segment a little bit later. But there is no defined early pace player in this race. Rhetorical might be able to go to the lead, but boy, he had such an easy trip at Keeneland last time, and it worked out so well, stalking and pouncing, pressing and pouncing, that you would think they would want to go back to that kind of style. The Lion in Winter's been kind of forward in some of the races in Europe. Formidable Man's been kind of forward some of the time and loves the turf course at Del Mar, but there is not much speed to speak of at all in the Breeders' Cup Mile. And we'll wrap it up, give you one last look at the graphic. Dirt Mile looks to have a pretty warm pace in there. Of course, you got Full Serrano, who won it last year on the front end. Citizen Bull won the Juvenile on the front end last year. You've got horses like White Abario, who are working fast in the morning. Nice horses, obviously, naturally very fast, goal-oriented. I think they're going to go pretty fast. Maybe not overcooking into Dirt Mile, but certainly on the fast end, you'll want a horse who's got some finishing ability. And finally, the last race, the Filly Ameriturf, race number 12 on Saturday. This is another pretty darn cold pace. Be Your Best and Stella Fire, the only two in that field to me that look like they want to go to the front. And not only are there horses who kind of are closers, but fairly deep closers with a lot of these runners. So the two Stellify and Be Your Best, who's the 7. If one of the two doesn't break, the other kind of gets left out there. And the old rule of thumb when you're handicapping, again, whether this is Saturday at Beulah Park or the Breeders' Cup, is it takes more than 2 for a speed duel. If there's only 2 horses that look to want to go to the front, then you should kind of assume a front trip can be comfortable, because if one of the other horses doesn't break at all or just isn't sharp that day, the second horse in that equation gets left loose. And so you get 3, 4, 5 horses who all want the lead. Now you've got a chance for a hot pace and a meltdown. So interesting the way that the paces shake out in the Breeders' Cup. Those are the kind of things. So I'm trying to figure out which horses in which places in the races. How will the races be won? Not necessarily who will win the races yet, as we're so far out from the Breeders' Cup now, right? It's still Tuesday. We're not running till Friday and Saturday. But how will these races be won? And now who can fit that mold? That's part of the reason why we do the pace scenario like we do. All right, let's go to our third topic this week on It's Official. We roll along. Attention shoppers. It's Breeders' Cup. We can't take favorites. We've got to look for some prices in the Breeders' Cup. I've identified a handful of horses, all 20-1 or more, that I'm interested in this year's Breeders' Cup. You've heard some of the names already because of the pace scenario. So a lot of times long shots will produce in races because a race sets up for them and sets up against the more favored horses. Too much pace for a speedy favorite? Maybe a closer clunks along and wins at a big price. Too slow of a pace for a favorite to come from behind? Maybe a speed horse at a big price just leads them on the merry chase. That's what we're looking at with some of these horses. Juvenile Fillies Turf, I like the works for Brave Deb and shows some speed. I think in the Juvenile Fillies Turf, that's one on Friday at a price 20-1 for Richard Mandela, worth a look. Most of the prices, I think, are on Saturday. The Friday races look chalkier on the surface at this time. And if you're trying to beat some of those favorites from Europe, I'm still trying to dig and find who those horses might be. But on Saturday, I feel like that there's definitely some long shot players to talk about on Saturday's card. Turf Sprint gets things going. Second race of the series in Saturday's 5th race. We've got Bucanero Fuerte in there. This is a horse who's got some pace about him from Europe. In the Turf Sprint, ranks 20-1 in the morning line. Gets Umberto Rispoli to ride. I love European horses getting jockeys with experience over the turf course. I can't call Rispoli American jockey, and similar to when some of these Euros come in and get Frankie Dettori now, because he's so Americanized in riding so many races here. But when you get a jockey who really understands American racing, but the talent of the European horse under them and the turn of foot that they often have, it's usually a good combination. Bucanero Fuerte from the outside post there in the Turf Sprint, the 11 hole under Rispoli. I think this horse is very interesting to potentially pop in at a little bit of a price. Again, these are horses 20-1 or more that you might be looking at in the exacta. Certainly, if you get a win bet on some of them, you won't need to bet much to make much. Madhouse, a horse in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Now, this is a horse, a 3-year-old, who I didn't give a whole lot of shot to on paper, and I'm working back to him. It's a very tough Breeders' Cup Sprint, but there are some horses that are kind of over the top and were really good last year and haven't been quite as good this year, right? Straight No Chaser, Mulligan, they haven't come back quite as good as they were last year. And remember, in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, the best sprinter in the country, Bookham Dano, is bypassing the race. So could this be won by a 3-year-old stepping up and taking on these big horses for the first time? Madhouse has really caught my eye in the training. We'll talk about some other horses training that have been eye catchers coming up in just a few minutes. So Madhouse at 30-1. Canterbury Downs connections, David Van Winkle. Interesting horse to me in the Breeders' Cup Sprint at a very, very big number. Madhouse 30-1 gets Luis Saez aboard, getting a pretty A-list rider there. In the Breeders' Cup Distaff, we talked about that being one of the hotter paces and how a meltdown could ensue there. I don't have any closers that I'm really, really excited about in that race, but Regaled is interesting. This horse comes off a win in the Delaware Handicap last time at 9 furlongs. Delaware's a deep and tiring track, probably got a lot out of that race. Beat absolutely nothing, but looked good doing it, and the race could set up. And that's what we're talking about, is when you get these big bomb prices, and the Distaff has been known for this over the years, some head scratchers, and you're saying, how in the world did that happen? It's sometimes a horse gets left loose on the lead, like Spain at a big price back in the day, and then sometimes it's some big deep closer that comes from off the pace and picks them up. Certainly it would be the latter if Regaled is able to win the Breeders' Cup Distaff. A long shot for sure, but 30-1 outside post, and you're probably going to be last coming out of the starting gate, so don't worry about the 13 hole when you've got the deepest closer in the field. Regaled will find his or her way over to the inside under Ramos. Let's talk about a couple other long shots. Gold Phoenix in the Breeders' Cup Turf. Talk about an underappreciated horse. Gold Phoenix has been fourth in the Breeders' Cup Turf twice in his career. He's won this Del Mar handicap over this turf course 4 times in his career. So I know the West Coast turf horses aren't much, and you say he beats the same horses every year in the Del Mar handicap. That's true. But when he gets to the Breeders' Cup, he's been in the Superfecta twice already. What more does he have to do? He gets another home game. He's running about as well as he's ever run. So, again, at 20-1 in the morning line, you could do a lot worse for sure than what we're getting with Gold Phoenix. So Gold Phoenix is a horse at 20-1 in the morning line to watch. 2 of them in the mile. Now, I like these horses as win contenders. Some of these other horses might kind of lope along and pass some horses. And like Gold Phoenix is not winning the Breeders' Cup Turf. I don't see that happening. But could he run 4th again, 3rd again, and jack up your super? Trifecta? Absolutely. But I do think that Argine from Japan and Kurat in the mile have a real chance to win that race. Both are 20-1 in the morning line in the Breeders' Cup mile. Kurat's going to be on the outside. We talked about a race that didn't have any speed to it with the outside under Rasa Ryan. I think this former Rabbit is now in the starring role this time. I think Kurat's got a shot in there to pull an upset at a big price. And Argine from Japan, I like this shot in here as well. This horse has a really nice turn of foot watching her on video. Interesting note about Argine is her trainer from Japan is a former assistant for Bobby Frankel in the United States. Well, what did Bobby Frankel do? Boy, turf milers and good turf fillies and mares. I've got a feeling that Argine is in good hands here, and someone who has a little bit of sense of what it takes to win American turf races. Interesting runner there. Argine from Japan, keep an eye on in the Breeders' Cup mile. A little bit of what you find out digging around. I can't say I knew those facts going into the research project of this year's Breeders' Cup. Once those pre-entries come out, that's the beauty of the pre-entries for a handicapper. You can kind of really dig and do your homework. And I think Argine might be one who's a little bit better than that 20-1 morning line. Other horses that we're going to look at a price in the filly and mare turf. Stellify for Brad Cox at 30-1 in the morning line. Again, this is strictly a pace play, but Stellify's in really good form right now. Florent Giroux's a good turf speed jockey. We've known that over the years. Not many else to go to the lead. Be Your Best probably pushes Stellify a little bit, but if Be Your Best doesn't fire, Stellify could be loose on the lead and go a long way. And trainer Brad Cox, if you watch the end of the Keeneland meet, his horses all really picked it up over the last week of the meet at Keeneland. And he seems to this year more than other years, most of the quality horses in Brad Cox's stable right now seem like they're turf horses. So Stellify, kind of an up-and-comer maybe in the filly and mare turf division. She's been good, but she hasn't taken on this kind of competition. But she's going to get a great pace scenario. She's drawn in the 2-hole to save all the ground. She gets every chance in the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf to see if she fits. And again, if she's 30-1 in the morning line, she's worth a bit of a look. Let's go to our next topic this week on It's Official. I believe next up we are talking about who's catching the eye in the morning. Which horses are training? We've talked about a few of these already. I've got to admit, this morning's training report, I haven't gotten a deep look into today with everything happened with Sovereignty, but up through what I saw through yesterday, through video and what they're putting out on the FanDuel shows and that sort. I've had a chance to watch all these horses, not all of the horses, but I've had a chance to watch dozens and dozens of these Breeders' Cup horses in training. Here are the ones right now that have caught my eye through Monday. Again, check back in on the Thursday podcast. We'll handicap on Thursday this week for that handicapping podcast. I think I said Friday early, and that's when we usually do the First Call podcast, but it'll be moved up to Thursday this year. But then I'll be able to get a better look at some of the horses who were out training this morning, and of course the Wednesday morning horses and the Thursday morning horses to maybe increase the list. But I'll tell you what, the two, and I put these in order. This is not in race order, so I don't mean to confuse you. I want to put these in orders of the horses who caught my eye the most. The two best workers going into this Breeders' Cup that I have seen are both in the filly and mare sprint. Splendora and Sweet Azteca both could not be doing any better. They are going to be serious threats in the Breeders' Cup filly and mare sprint. Splendora on the slight cutback, Sweet Azteca on the stretch out. 7 furlongs is a difficult distance to project for both of them. But I'm telling you right now, they could not be training any better. Splendora's workout in 47 and change. I thought she worked in about 51. I wasn't even sure it was a work. It looked more like just a mid-track gallop. And then I thought, wait a minute, that could not have been 47 and 2. Went back, timed it. It was. Timed it again. It was. She is doing absolutely wonderful right now. Darth Vader training tremendous up to the Breeders' Cup Distaff. I think she's sitting on a big race. Turf Sprint, AG Bullet really worked well before heading to Del Mar, working for Richie Baltus. She really looks sharp going into her race. She Feels Pretty has been training exceptionally well for Cherie DeVille, and that one could get a beautiful trip. We talk about not much speed in that filly and mare turf. She Feels Pretty might sit third behind the 2 speed horses we talked about, the Safi horse and the Cox horse who might go to the lead. She Feels Pretty might trip out and get one of the best trips of the entire Breeders' Cup, and she has really trained exceptionally well. We talked about Brave Deb as well as she's working towards the juvenile fillies turf at a price. Madhouse, we already talked about him. And then in the classic, obviously the big newsmaker right now is Sovereignty and what's going on with him. And the day before that, talking about fierceness in the post position draw and what happened with him. But Baeza just kind of quietly is working like a monster. He is really, really training well. I don't know if he's good enough. He's got to make up a couple lengths on journalism. He's got to make up a couple lengths on Sovereignty if he's in the race. Then we have to get into the whole discussion of how he matches up with the older horses. But Baeza is training as good as he could possibly be training right now. He will run the best race of his life. No question in my mind. Whether or not that runs 5th or 6th in this field could be the case. But he is absolutely training lights out. Baeza is set to run the race of his life. It's a matter of how he stacks up. If that's the case, let Tote be your guide. If you're getting 10, 15 to 1 on Baeza, you could certainly say if he runs the race of his life, you're going to be smiling with a 15 or a $20, $30 mutual. If he's down 7, 8 to 1, something like that, you might be like, that's a little light to see if he can beat these other horses. I'll go with the more reliable and known older crop in this year's Breeders' Cup Classic. But Baeza certainly training exceptionally well. Give you one more look at that list of horses who have caught my eye training. Again, this through Monday morning does not include the Tuesday trainers. Splendora, Sweet Azteca, Darth Vader, AG Bullet, She Feels Pretty, Brave Deb, Madhouse, and Baeza, all horses who have really, really caught my eye. I put them at the head of the list of the ones that I've been able to see. Now, again, we will couch that by saying we did not see all, 181 horses, whatever it is, who are entered in the Breeders' Cup so far. But again, the ones who have stood out would be on that particular list. All right, let's wrap things up here on the podcast this week with the hottest takes for the weekend. If you didn't think any of those takes were so hot to this point, these are my hottest takes for Breeders' Cup, number 42 coming up. How about Californians winning 6 championship races? If that sounds blasphemous, you've got 2 big chances in the Breeders' Cup Dirt races on Friday. Obviously, you're going to have the favorite in the juvenile fillies, with Explora and Baffert having Bottle of Rouge in there. In the juvenile, you've got Intrepido and Brandt and Litmus Test in there. Yes, you've got to beat Ted Nafi, but that could be another spot. But it's Saturday where there's a lot of Californians you've really got to watch. We're talking about the horses training towards the filly and mare sprint. Sweet Azteca training so well. Splendora training so well. You've got Tamara there for the West Coast. She's 7-2 in the morning line. You got the top 3, 4 morning line favorites in the filly and mare sprint could go to the Californians. The turf sprint, you got Motorious, morning line favorite there, down on the fence under Antonio Fresu, who rides the turf sprints at Del Mar better than anyone. Keep an eye on Fresu in the turf sprints this weekend. Then you go to the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and again, you're looking at another situation where Straight No Chaser, the defending champ, represents California in there. Copian, the 7-2 in the morning line, the second choice. She's a Californian. So the West Coast really has a lot of hands to play. Seismic Beauty, the favorite in the distaff. You see how I'm getting to 6 here? I mean, we didn't even get through midway through the card on Saturday, and the Californians are loaded. Then you get to the Classic. You've got Baeza in that particular spot. You've got Journalism there. Probably be a little reach for them to win the Breeders' Cup Classic, but we shall see how that shakes out. And then towards the end of the card, the Dirt Mile, Nisos, morning line favorite on Saturday. Another Californian, second choice in the line, Full Serrano. The Californians are absolutely loaded in this Breeders' Cup with big-time chances. I'm going to say they win 6 of the 14. Now, my second hot take on here is no Ryan Moore will be a bigger deal than you think. Nobody's really talking about this with the European horses, and particularly Aidan O'Brien, which would be the vast majority of the Ryan Moore mounts in the Breeders' Cup. But jockey Ryan Moore, one of the world's best and the most prolific winner of an international jockey in Breeders' Cup history, was injured with a broken leg back in August and is out for the rest of the season. He's not riding the horses for Coolmore and Aidan O'Brien in this year's Breeders' Cup. So that has turned things over to kind of like a backup quarterback situation where not just one, but 2 jocks are being used by the Coolmore group, Christophe Soumillon, and also the other jockey is Wayne Lorden. Well, between those 2, 1 for 15 for Wayne Lorden in the Breeders' Cup. Christophe Soumillon is 1 for 10 in the Breeders' Cup. Soumillon's win came in 2005, or when was that last one? Yeah, 2005 for Soumillon, and Wayne Lorden's 1 for 15 in the Breeders' Cup and hasn't won one in several years either. I think his goes back to something like he's 0 for 4 at Del Mar. 19, Iridescence was the last one, the one that Wayne Lorden won. So neither one of those riders has won a Breeders' Cup race since 2005 or 2019, and you're replacing a legend. When we talk about Ryan Moore's success in the Breeders' Cup, he wasn't so dominant like right off the get to me of a European rider, but he learned American riding really quickly and quickly became a major force in the Breeders' Cup. When you consider Ryan Moore's got 16 wins in the Breeders' Cup, Frankie Dettori's got 15. That's 31 between those 2 international jockeys who really understand how to ride the American racing scene. If you go for the next 5 jockeys or the next 10 jockeys who have won 2 or more races in Breeders' Cup history that are international, those 10 jockeys combined have 35 wins. 31 from these 2 guys. So you're taking basically a quarter of the international wins in the Breeders' Cup amongst, major riders with Ryan Moore out of the mix here. I think it's very significant. And Ryan Moore is a guy who was 31% in the exacta in the Breeders' Cup. I mean, 1 out of 3 Ryan Moore mounts basically landed in the exacta in the Breeders' Cup. I think it's very significant that he's not going to be there. One of the things that has been spoken about from Aidan O'Brien and his group with the jockey situation is weights are important here because some of the riders, Lorden and Soumillon, one can make 119, the other can't. And so some of the riding decisions are made based on some of the weights in some of these races. And if you're getting to a championship level with the Breeders' Cup, I know that the Coolmore guys, are winning even without Ryan Moore in Europe. I don't know that they win here in the U.S. so much without Ryan Moore. And after the post position draws we saw, 13 hole in one of the 2-year-old turf races, 14 hole in the other 2-year-old turf race, a couple other kind of difficult post positions for those Aidan O'Brien runners. and you don't have your number one go-to rider who really rides the American scene as good as any international jockey not named Frankie Dettori. I mean, those two guys, like I said, are head and shoulders above the rest. It's remarkable. There's not that many international jockeys all time who have won 2 or more Breeders' Cup races. And when you take everybody who's won 2 or more, they barely come up with the total that we've seen from Moore and from Frankie. So I think it's a big deal. Would you play against some of these horses? Different rider in bad post positions? I think you're open to discussion, even if they look like even money shots on paper. Let's go to our final hot topic this week. And our hot take is John Velazquez wins 4 at age 54. He's riding as good as ever. Did you see the Keeneland meet? John Velazquez had a phenomenal run at Keeneland. He won 7 stakes races, came ahead away from an 8th on closing day at Keeneland, which ended last week. The 7 stakes wins at Keeneland for John Velazquez tied a record set in 1998 by Pat Day. If you followed racing in Kentucky or anywhere nationally, you know Pat Day's dominance in Kentucky is like almost any other rider you've seen in any individual regional colony. When you break a Pat Day record, you have done something phenomenal. He tied Pat Day's record, and he didn't even ride a couple days of the meet, riding up in New York instead. Johnny V's coming off of a really strong run, and we look at some of the entries that John Velazquez has in this year's Breeders' Cup. I mean, he is absolutely loaded in mounts, so I think Johnny V has a chance to win as many as 4 races. I don't like to look off camera so much, but if you look at some of the mounts that he's got Ted Naffy in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That gets him going. He's got Tommy Joe in the Juvenile Fillies. So you talk about that. Schwarzenegger in the Juvenile Turf. He's got 3 key mounts right on the Friday card with horses who are obviously major players. He'll ride Ultimate Love on Friday as well, and he's got no mount in the Juvenile Turf. But he's got a chance for 3 possibly on the first day. And then you go into Saturday, the John Velazquez mounts. He's got Praying in the first leg. AG Bullet training tremendously towards the Juvenile Turf or the Turf Sprint. I think that is a phenomenal spot there. And AG Bullet's going to be a major player in that particular race. He's got the defending champ Straight No Chaser going in the sprint ranks. Johnny V rides Dorth Vader, who I'm almost certain will be my top pick in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. She's training exceptionally well and is really an underrated race mare. Johnny V riding there. Let's see. He's out of the turf. No turf mount. Of course, he's got Fierceness. The job for Fierceness, if Sovereignty comes out, obviously becomes a lot easier, but nonetheless, he's second choice in the Classic. Formidable Man is 6 for 6 over the turf, I believe, and at Del Mar. He's got that mount in the Breeders' Cup Mile. That would certainly be an upset if he's able to pull that one off. No mount for him in the Dirt Mile, and then he's going to wrap it up. Johnny V is aboard She Feels Pretty, who figures to get one of the best trips in all of the Breeders' Cup, potentially sitting third behind those 2 speed horses we talked about in the Philly Ameriturf. So Johnny V, age 54, I'm setting the over-under. He's going to win 4 races on Breeders' Cup weekend. We'll check back next week and see how many of these hot takes came true. Let's recap the topics this week on It's Officials. We do each and every week. We're taking Sovereignty's temperature. What's going to happen tomorrow and the day after? I think by tomorrow, we're going to have a much better sense if Sovereignty is in or out. Certainly, they would pull the plug quicker if they're going to stay another day and try to find out. Then obviously, we're not going to find out he's in tomorrow. If we get any news tomorrow, it would be that he's out. We looked at all the different pace scenarios for the Breeders' Cup races and the importance of trying to map out how the race will be won before you pick who wins it. Attention shoppers, horses 20-1 or more, we spotlighted those in the Breeders' Cup that could pull upsets or be exotics exploders. Who's catching the eye in the morning? We listed you 7 or 8 big ones there, including a couple that are trading up a storm towards the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Sprint. And our hottest takes for the weekend. Ryan Moore not there is a bigger deal than people were saying. Johnny V could win 4 races, and the Californians could take 6. Those 5 topics are now official because Jeff Siegel and I say so. Jeff, of course, the creator of this podcast and my co-host for more than 400 episodes. We lost Jeff to cancer not too long ago, a few weeks back. This will be our first Breeders' Cup without Jeff. In his spirit, I'm going to root for Nisos in the Dirt Mile because I think of any horse in training, that was the one that gave Jeff more goosebumps, and his Goosebump Award each week was Nisos. So I know he's looking down from above, and we'll be rooting for Nisos in the Dirt Mile. I hope you join us on Thursday when Scott Shapiro and I handicap the races for Breeders' Cup weekend, give you some more handicapping thoughts. Hopefully this was very helpful to you. We do it each and every Tuesday on the It's Official podcast. We'll look at races from around the country, stars of tomorrow, and more on that as we get back to the weekly format. But hope you enjoyed this one. Good luck in the Breeders' Cup, everybody. And for a live show, I think we got through it rather unscathed. Good luck.